The mess hall buzzed with the usual evening chatter of Fort Braxton, metal trays clanking against tables as soldiers unwound from another grueling day of training. Staff Sergeant Maya Chan moved through the line with quiet efficiency, her slight frame barely filling out her ACUs as she selected a modest portion of meatloaf and mashed potatoes. At 5'4" and weighing maybe 120 pounds, soaking wet, she drew little attention from the sea of larger, louder soldiers around her. She found an empty table near the back corner, away from the main flow of traffic, and settled in with her dinner and a well-worn paperback novel. The book was her evening ritual, a small escape that helped her decompress from the intensity of her new assignment. 3 weeks at Braxton, and she still felt like the outsider, the quiet Asian woman who kept to herself and rarely spoke above a whisper. That's when she caught their attention. 4 recruits at a nearby table, their voices growing progressively louder as they noticed her solitary presence. The biggest one, a mountain of a man named Rodriguez according to his name tape, nudged his buddies and jerked his chin in her direction. Where in the world are you watching this unfold from? And what time is it there, as Maya's peaceful evening is about to take a dramatic turn? Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, his voice carrying across the mess hall as he spoke to his companions. "Look at little Miss Bookworm over there," he said, gesturing with his fork. "But she's never even held a real weapon." The other 3 recruits chuckled, emboldened by their ringleader's commentary. Maya kept her eyes on her novel, but her peripheral vision tracked every movement at their table. She had dealt with this type before in 3 different deployments across 2 continents. The loud ones who mistook volume for strength, who assumed that her quiet demeanor meant weakness. Thompson, a wiry kid from Tennessee with nervous energy, stood up and approached her table. "Hey there, sweetheart," he drawled, his accent thick with false confidence. "You know this is a military base, right? Not a library. Maybe you'd be more comfortable somewhere else." She looked up from her book, her dark eyes meeting his with calm steadiness. "I'm fine here, thank you," she replied softly, her voice barely above a conversational tone. The response only seemed to encourage him as he gestured for his friends to join him. The other recruits rose from their seats, sensing entertainment. Have you ever witnessed someone being underestimated just because they didn't fit the expected mold? Maya closed her book carefully and set it aside, her movements deliberate and controlled as 4 shadows fell across her table. The 4 recruits formed a loose semicircle around Maya's table, their body language shifting from casual mockery to something more predatory. Rodriguez stepped closer, his massive frame casting a shadow over her dinner tray. "What's your MOS, princess?" he asked, using the military acronym for job specialty with deliberate condescension. "Let me guess, admin? Supply? Something nice and safe behind a desk?" Maya took a measured sip of her water, her expression remaining neutral. Her training had taught her to read situations like this, to calculate angles and assess threats with clinical precision. 4 untested recruits, probably fresh out of basic training, their movements telegraphing inexperience despite their bravado. Jenkins, the shortest of the group, but stocky with gym-built muscle, laughed harshly. "I bet she's never even qualified expert on her weapon. Probably couldn't hit the broadside of a barn." The comment drew snickers from his companions, their confidence growing with each unchallenged taunt. Around the mess hall, other soldiers began to notice the commotion. Some turned away, unwilling to get involved in what appeared to be harmless hazing. Others watched with growing unease, sensing that the situation was escalating beyond typical military banter. Maya slowly pushed her tray aside, creating clear space on the table surface. "Gentlemen," she said quietly, her voice carrying a subtle edge that none of them recognized, "I suggest you return to your dinner." Thompson laughed at Maya's suggestion, the sound harsh and mocking. "Or what?" he challenged, leaning down until his face was uncomfortably close to hers. "You gonna report us to the sergeant? Tell them we hurt your feelings?" The 4th recruit, Davis, had been silent until now, but emboldened by his friend's behavior, he reached across the table and flicked Maya's book onto the floor. The paperback hit the linoleum with a soft thud, its pages splaying open. "Oops," he said with fake innocence. "Guess you better pick that up." Maya's eyes followed the book's trajectory, then slowly returned to Davis's face. Something flickered in her expression, a momentary tightening around her eyes that vanished so quickly the recruits missed it entirely. She stood up slowly, her movements fluid and controlled, and began to step around the table toward her fallen book. Rodriguez blocked her path, his chest puffed out with manufactured authority. "Where do you think you're going?" he demanded. "We're not done talking to you yet." The mess hall had grown noticeably quieter, conversations dying as more soldiers turned to watch the unfolding confrontation. Maya straightened to her full height, still dwarfed by the men surrounding her. She looked each of them in the eye, her gaze steady and measuring. "Last chance, gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying a new quality that made several nearby soldiers sit up straighter in recognition. Rodriguez's face darkened at Maya's warning, his pride stung by what he perceived as defiance from someone he considered beneath his notice. "Last chance for what?" he snarled, stepping even closer until Maya had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "You think you're tough because you wear the uniform?" Jenkins moved to flank her left side while Thompson circled right, the four recruits now forming a tighter box around the small woman. Their movements were clumsy but coordinated, like pack animals sensing weakness. Davis remained behind her, cutting off any retreat toward the mess hall exit. Maya's breathing remained steady, her hands relaxed at her sides despite being completely surrounded. She had been in this exact position before, outnumbered and underestimated, in places far more dangerous than a military dining facility. The familiar calm of tactical assessment settled over her like a comfortable blanket. What would you do if you found yourself surrounded with no way out and no one willing to help? The question hung in the air as Maya's eyes continued their methodical sweep, cataloging weak points and calculating distances. Rodriguez raised his hand as if to shove her backward, his patience finally exhausted. That's when Maya moved. Not dramatically, not with obvious aggression, but with the subtle shift of weight that marked the difference between victim and predator. Rodriguez's hand never reached its target. Maya's left arm intercepted his wrist with surgical precision, her fingers finding the pressure point that made his entire arm go momentarily numb. Before he could process what had happened, her right elbow drove upward into his solar plexus with controlled force, doubling him over and sending him staggering backward into an empty chair. Thompson reacted first, lunging forward with more enthusiasm than skill. Maya sidestepped his clumsy charge, her movement economical and fluid, then used his own momentum to guide him face first into the table she had just vacated. His dinner tray clattered to the floor, mashed potatoes scattering across the linoleum as he groaned and clutched his nose. Jenkins tried to grab her from behind, his arms reaching around her shoulders in what might have been effective against an untrained opponent. Maya dropped her center of gravity, slipped under his grasp like water, and swept his legs with a precise ankle hook that sent him crashing backward onto the hard floor. The entire sequence had taken perhaps 8 seconds. Davis, the last man standing, froze in place as he watched his 3 companions writhing on the ground. Have you ever seen someone's true nature revealed in a moment of crisis? The mess hall had fallen completely silent except for the groans of the defeated recruits. Davis stood frozen, his eyes darting between his groaning companions and the deceptively small woman who had dismantled them with terrifying efficiency. Maya turned toward him slowly, her expression calm, but her dark eyes holding a warning that transcended words. She took one measured step in his direction. That single step broke whatever courage Davis had left. He stumbled backward, his hands raised in surrender, before turning and fleeing toward the mess hall exit without a word. His retreat drew scattered chuckles from the watching soldiers, the tension in the room beginning to shift from shock to appreciation. Maya surveyed the scene with professional detachment. Rodriguez was still bent over, struggling to catch his breath. Thompson sat slumped against the overturned table, blood trickling from his nose. Jenkins lay flat on his back, staring at the ceiling with the dazed expression of someone trying to figure out how he had ended up there. She walked calmly to where her book lay on the floor, picked it up, and smoothed its crumpled pages with gentle care. The simple action somehow made her previous display of violence seem even more remarkable by contrast. Around the mess hall, conversations resumed in hushed, respectful tones. This story reminds us that strength comes in many forms and everyone deserves respect regardless of their size or appearance. Maya gathered her belongings, her evening routine interrupted but her dignity intact. The mess hall doors burst open as Sergeant First Class Williams entered, drawn by reports of a disturbance. His eyes immediately swept the scene, taking in the overturned furniture, scattered food, and 3 recruits in various states of recovery. His gaze finally settled on Maya, who stood calmly beside her original table, book in hand. "What happened here?" Williams demanded, his voice carrying the authority of 15 years in the Army. Several soldiers began speaking at once, but he raised his hand for silence. "You," he said, pointing at Rodriguez, who was finally standing upright. "Explain." Rodriguez opened his mouth, then closed it again, his face flushing red with embarrassment. "We were just talking to her, Sergeant," he mumbled, unable to meet Williams' eyes. "Things got a little heated and we all kind of fell down." The explanation drew barely suppressed snorts of laughter from the watching soldiers. Williams' expression remained stern as he turned to Maya. "Staff Sergeant Shun, is that your version of events?" Maya straightened slightly. "The recruits were being disruptive, Sergeant Williams. I suggested they return to their meal. When they declined, I helped them find their seats." Her matter-of-fact tone made the understated description even more impressive. Williams nodded slowly, recognition dawning in his expression as he processed her name and bearing. Williams studied Maya more carefully, his trained eye noting details he had missed during their brief previous encounters. The way she carried herself, the controlled stillness that marked certain types of soldiers, the unconscious positioning that kept escape routes clear. Something clicked in his memory. "Staff Sergeant Shun," he said slowly, "you wouldn't happen to be Maya Shun, would you? The one who served with 3rd Group?" Maya's expression remained neutral, but she nodded once. "Yes, Sergeant Williams." A ripple of whispers spread through the mess hall as soldiers began connecting the dots. 3rd Special Forces Group had a reputation that preceded them, and anyone who had served with them was automatically accorded a different level of respect. Williams turned back to the 3 recruits, his voice taking on a harder edge. "Do you gentlemen have any idea who you just tried to intimidate?" Rodriguez, Thompson, and Jenkins exchanged confused glances, still nursing their various injuries and wounded pride. Thompson wiped blood from his nose with his sleeve. "She's just some admin clerk," he said defensively, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. Williams shook his head in disbelief. "Admin clerk? Son, you just tried to pick a fight with a Green Beret who spent 18 months in Afghanistan hunting high-value targets." The words hit the mess hall like a physical blow. The silence that followed Williams' revelation was absolute. Every conversation in the mess hall had stopped. Every head turned toward their table. Rodriguez's face went pale as the full implications of what had just happened began to sink in. They had tried to bully a decorated Special Forces operator. Williams continued, his voice carrying clearly across the silent room. "Staff Sergeant Shun earned her Green Beret the hard way, gentlemen. She's qualified expert marksman on 7 different weapon systems, speaks 3 languages fluently, and holds advanced certifications in close quarters combat and battlefield medicine." Thompson's hand unconsciously went to his still bleeding nose, understanding now why her strikes had been so precise and devastating. Jenkins remained on the floor, no longer from injury, but from the crushing weight of his humiliation. Maya stood quietly through Williams' recitation of her credentials, neither proud nor embarrassed by the attention. She had never sought recognition for her service, preferring to let her actions speak when necessary and remain invisible when possible. Have you ever witnessed someone receive the recognition they truly deserved? The questions seemed to hang in the air as soldiers throughout the mess hall began to rise from their seats. What started as scattered applause grew into sustained recognition, the sound echoing off the walls as Maya's fellow service members showed their respect. The applause continued as Maya nodded graciously to her fellow soldiers, her cheeks coloring slightly at the unexpected attention. She had spent years learning to blend in, to be underestimated because it often provided tactical advantages in the field. Tonight, that same quality had nearly caused an unnecessary confrontation. Williams turned his attention back to the three recruits, his expression stern but not without compassion. "You three have learned an important lesson tonight," he said. "Never judge a soldier by their size, their gender, or their quiet demeanor. Some of our most lethal warriors come in unexpected packages." Rodriguez struggled to his feet, his pride thoroughly demolished, but his respect grudgingly earned. "Staff Sergeant," he said to Maya, his voice hoarse with embarrassment, "I owe you an apology." "We all do. What we did was inexcusable." Maya studied his face for a moment, reading the sincerity in his expression. She nodded once. "Apology accepted, Rodriguez. Just remember this feeling the next time you consider judging someone before you know their story." Thompson and Jenkins mumbled their own apologies, unable to meet her eyes directly. The mess hall gradually returned to normal conversation levels, though many soldiers continued to glance in Maya's direction with newfound appreciation. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that heroes come in all shapes and sizes. 3 weeks later, Maya walked through the same mess hall to find a dramatically different atmosphere. Soldiers nodded respectfully as she passed, some stopping their conversations to offer genuine smiles and greetings. Her quiet presence was no longer overlooked, but appreciated for what it represented. Rodriguez approached her table, but this time with a dinner tray in hand and respectful distance in his posture. "Mind if I sit, Staff Sergeant?" he asked. Maya gestured to the empty chair across from her, noting how he waited for permission before settling down. "I wanted to thank you," he said quietly. "What happened that night, it changed how I see things, how I see people. I was raised to think strength meant being loud and taking up space, but you showed me real strength is something else entirely." Maya looked up from her book, the same paperback she had been reading that evening 3 weeks ago. "Strength is knowing when to fight and when to walk away," she replied. "You chose to learn from your mistake instead of letting pride make you bitter. That takes a different kind of courage." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Thompson and Jenkins, both carrying trays and wearing expressions of genuine respect. The 4 soldiers shared their meal in comfortable conversation, the former antagonists now eager students learning from someone they had drastically underestimated. "What lessons have you learned from unexpected teachers in your own life?"